Good evening all, welcome to another Kingscrusher radio show. So it's about 9 Tuesday. Okay, we're going to carry on looking at two classic games from the 1960s. This is what Chess.com regards as the best of the best, as voted by. This appears in many members' collections, talked about, clipped a lot. So this first game is an absolute gem. Actually, it is. I said last week that was one of my favourite Petrosian games, and this is also another one of my favourites actually for Tigran Petrosian. And of course he was world champion during the 60s. In fact, I'll give you the exact date he was world champion just to be on the safe side. So Tigran Petrosian gets at least two games in this, the 10 of the best of the best. So just checking his profile. Was it the 1960? Oh, well, it was 1963. First match. Anyway, you can look up the bios. Actually, I can't immediately say. Okay. So this game, Knight F3 was played. So this is in Bled, Yugoslavia, 1961, and Ludek Pashman is the opponent with black. So Petrosian's not really playing something very sharp in a theoretical sense. We see basically a very solid, but it can be quite tedious to play. This sort of style of opening. It's not razor sharp, but let's see what happens. So white castle, bishop g7, d3. The thing is here, usually actually e5 is played here. Black has to be quite careful about the colour complexes getting absolutely massacred on them, because this kind of structure can weaken d5. Quite often players will try and exploit the light squares, but what was played is slightly unusual here. It seems the dart squares are compromised with this move. You can't get away with weakening some squares. The dart squares start to be weakened even this early, you can say, at move 5. This isn't the most popular move, but it has been played. e4, knight g e7, rook e1. Black castles here. Now perhaps, this is interesting, to keep a fluid pawn structure. I believe d6 looks logical, and it is the most played move. It keeps the pawn structure fluid, and in the event of e5, let's add a Kapitsa here. In the event of e5, I think black can just take. So that's not really a problem. I don't think black even has to play this. He can just take that. That's fine. So white was actually allowed, it seems, to consider playing e5, and it is a very interesting move. As I mentioned, you've got to be careful on the colour complexes with black, and it seems here that this move e5 creates a potentially nasty bind on the dart squares actually. Now I mean, whatever way that pawn's challenged, it's going to compromise black's position a bit. Black actually played d6, and after e takes, queen takes, this is actually already kind of nice for white after knight bd2. The dart squares are quite sensitive, and we see actually queen c7, knight b3, black getting maybe a little bit more tied down. We see knight d4. That's an indirect way of trying to defend against knight takes c5. But now this tempo gain on the queen. Queen b6 is played. And here actually, that queen, for some reason, in this particular position, is subject to harassment. Knight e5, it's subject to harassment because now there's a horrible threat of knight c4. So it seems already white has used successfully a fairly nothing opening to achieve a massive positional advantage already. Massive positional advantage here. This is actually a really big threat of knight c4, kicking in the queen, and you note that the two bishops are guarding these squares, right? So if the queen goes back, say to d8, then c5 would drop. Just to demonstrate that, just say a5, knight c4, queen d8, we just bang, knight takes c5. So that's the threat now. Knight c4 is a horrible threat. Black played knight takes b3, and in fact, guess what white plays in this position? White play there is a wonderfully, I think I'm starting to realize what it is about the Petrosian games. He was highly risk averse later in his career. Maybe not initially. He played some very strong, daring, more risky earlier, it seems, in his career. But there is a kind of powerful aesthetic in these games with these nothing openings that he's very risk averse. So those that don't like any risks might actually truly enjoy his wins. This is one of those classic iconic wins without too much risk. Now, okay, so white playing this position, what would you play? Would you take the pawn, or would you do something? Would you take the knight routinely? I guess so, towards the centre, right? You wouldn't consider c takes. But is there any other move? What would you play? And it's been there's a comment by Fisher actually on this move. Okay, I'm not sure it's justified to wreck your structure like this, by the way. Even though that might be playable, and there might be some benefits to that actually, like the c file. It's not entirely terrible, and also a takes is not entirely terrible either, because that gives some benefits. But actually, we see a tempo game, which might be the most powerful move available, it seems. Fisher describes it as a very nice tempo gaining move. So harassing that queen. Now, if the queen, the queen actually could have gone back, that does seem plausible, but actually she went to b5. And now we see a takes b. And here there's an idea maybe of bishop d6 to harass this pawn, because that pawn's pinned to the rook. With bishop d6 we'd have rook a5 on that pawn. So that pawn is still, it's a bit concerning, that pawn on c5. As far as all of black's pawns go, that one's the most likely to drop off because of these tempo gains revolving around that pawn. So we see a5, and this further fixes black down structurally. You see the dark squares, they're getting a little bit weaker. Again, the dark squares have got a little bit weaker. Okay, and we do see bishop d6, which hits the knight, of course. That is actually protected. But now a very strong attacking move is played. So this is an awkward way of attacking, of defending the knight. If rook e8 had been played, let's see, maybe there's lots of nice options for white. Maybe bishop c7 with the idea of knight d6. That's one of the strong ones. So anyway, we see this bishop f6, which seems awkward because it's using, a king defender using this sensitive. This has got responsibilities, this fianchetto bishop, to weaken. There's squares here around the king, which are even more fatal in general than any dark squares on the queen side. So these are the more fatal ones potentially in general in chess. Sometimes you've got to look after your fianchettoed bishop. So anyway, white plays an attacking move here. So white's play here. Again, it's a lot of this game is very neat because it's with tempos all the time. Very neat game with tempos. So that's I guess part of the wonderful aesthetic, that this guy was so risk averse that we look at his wins and the opponents never stood a chance. They were never given any opportunity to do anything sometimes. So here, give black no opportunity to do anything. So it's queen f3 time. Yeah, the knight's protecting the pawn. There's no bishop takes. We just say that's protected. So queen f3. And now, yeah, black's in a little bit of trouble here. He has to protect the bishop with his king. And as I say, I think forcing moves, Petrosian is not an alien to forcing moves. He loves them, even the most outrageous ones. Because again, I mean, from a risk avoiding perspective, if you can get in a set of winning forcing moves, then that's wonderful, right? Now, this next move prepares something absolutely wonderful. Fisher describes it as actually preparing a very beautiful finish. This next move here, yeah, black really hasn't had any counterplay, by the way, in this game. This is the wonderful aesthetic feeling I think some of you might get. Black really didn't stand a chance. His queen side pieces, especially this bishop, miserable. His queen, I don't know what it's doing on b5. It's not extremely threatening. I mean, there's nothing too much to worry about, but this next move is setting the scene for something fantastic. Can you see what it is, this next move? So you guys don't see the false mate in 10? I thought some of you are good at mate. There's a false mate in 10. No? But even Petrosian missed it. There's actually a false mate in 10 in this position. No? You didn't see it? There's literally... Okay, no, I don't want to spoil it for you. No, he didn't go for that. It's suboptimal. But what he played, he sets it up anyway. Okay. We'll come back to this position. He plays rook e4, which is good. It's quite good. Now black played rook d8 and white's play here. So white's play here. Okay, yeah. Look, black is essentially saying, look at black's pawns. I just can't get over it. The pawns. Look at these pawns on light squares. Look at the adjacent dark squares for a moment. Isn't that wonderful? But these are the more critical ones, yeah. These are the more critical around the king. Yeah, bang. Queen takes f6 check. That's one radical way of taking out the fianchetto defender of the dark squares. King takes. And the idea is very... it's very interesting. It's like literally wrenching out someone's reverse gear. You know, like we drive cars and like to go in reverse sometimes, or we like to go in reverse sometimes. It literally wrenches out black's, this is my clue, wrenches out black's reverse gear facility. There's a couple of moves here which are stunning. Okay, so it's bishop e5, bringing the king out, and then stopping the king from going into reverse. Yeah, the king might want to escape back. Bang! This is the problem move. And the king is just getting mated. The king is just getting mated. It can't. Well, it can't reverse here either. The king is just getting mated. It's funny. You got the queen on b5, the king on g5, and a load of pawns on light squares. Black's really just. It's just getting mated. Okay, so black resigned here because if I'll give you an example. e5. Check. Yeah. And there's two mates in twos at least. There's bishop f3, bishop g4, bishop takes g4 mate. Or, if you prefer, there's rook takes e5. And then if king g4, there's knight e3 checkmate. If g5, there's rook takes g5 checkmate. Yeah. Now there was actually a mate in 10 earlier, by the way. The rook e4 is actually technically. Let's have a look at this. The pattern existed here already in this position. You know, rook e4 was played. Apparently, this is a mate in 10. The engine says. Sorry, we just put this position. This is a forced mate in 10. This is quite a hard puzzle position. So the mate in 10, apparently, queen takes. Check. So we don't even need the rook e4. Even this position, it's now a forced checkmate. The rook didn't have to be on e4. Funny enough, it seems the best black can delay with. This doesn't look right. Is queen c6. Because white is actually threatening. Say to play, white is threatening. Let's give a silly move. Check. Rook e4 and checkmate here. So that's kind of the threat after bishop g7. So this is the longest black can stretch it out to a mate in 7 with this. Then there's knight e5, threatening, f4 check, king h5, g4 check, king h4. I'll put this on the board, bishop f6. Let me put that on the board for a moment. So say black did a silly move. Let me put this on the board. Check. 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 And that's mating there after bishop takes g5. So that's the threat to parry. So basically queen c6 in this position, black does best to maybe just take this off to survive as long as possible. f5, but then check, and it's still a mate in 4 after h3, threatening g4, I think. Yeah. Yeah, so g4, and then we have rook h1, checkmate. So actually this game shows this big connection between what seems, actually, it seems there's a big connection shown in this game. Actually, I mean, I've seen this game several times, but maybe for someone underestimating the power of weak squares, weak color complexes, there's a gigantic connection vividly demonstrated in this game that you can see just early on. You know, these little pawn moves which weaken dark squares, or the fianchetto which weakens dark squares. You see that relationship shown quite vividly in this game, that it can result in tactical disasters. You know, having, well, the ones over here were tempo games. The queen was just put in the middle of nowhere, and then the king just got it basically. But you can see a lot of the action is on the compromised dark squares. So there's a big relationship between something which you might consider quite abstract to think about when we say about the color complex, the set of squares weakened of a certain color. But yeah, it's a very direct relationship tactically here shown. between that and murdering someone tactically. I think you might agree. So I hope you got something from this. This is an iconic Petrosian game, one of my favourites. One of Fisher. I get the impression it might have been one of Fisher's favourite Petrosian games. It must be up there. Must be. He had comments for this game anyway, and he called that a real problem move, Bishop G7. Fisher described this as a real problem move. Okay, hope you enjoyed that one. Let's go on to game number 2, which actually, you know, also features, I would argue, a dark square bind. This game 2, I'm going to show you, is also a dark square bind, in my view. Set early on, similar kind of style of opening, actually. To get a very big dark square grip. Fisher against this name, Mayag Marsaran. I think that's close, anyway. So he got the IM title in 1966. He competed in the Interzonal in Tunisia 1967. He's from Mongolia. Okay, so let's have a look at this game. So e4 from Fisher, e6, and we get this kind of fianchetto system from Fisher now in 1967. So knight d2, knight f6, this fianchetto system here. So these kind of coiled spring setups, actually they can be a lot more interesting than other razor sharp openings. They keep the tension and the piece pressure behind the pawns for a little bit. So this coiled spring kind of setup, Fisher scored heavily with this kind of setup early in his career. So here we see a sort of dark square bind being set up. At strong point e5 being overprotected, and knight f1. This also echoes this dark square bind. Knight f1. This has become like standard like maneuvers in this position, where you try and weaken black on his dark squares here whilst maintaining an iron grip on e5, and you can do this in King's Indian style positions with black. So this is the kind of dark square plan. So you don't have to always sacrifice your queen for a bishop on g7. So let's see, b4, h4, a5, bishop f4, maintaining an iron grip on e5, a4, a3, trying to slow black down on the queen side, takes, knight a5, black's trying to slice white's pawn structure a bit, but the pawns are trying to be solid at the moment. Fisher's trying to maintain a solid pawn structure as long as possible. Knight e3, bishop a6. Black's going to try and slice it down, isolate pawn at least. But bishop h3 is played, which seems on the surface pointless. What is this bishop doing? Eyeing that. Well, actually f6 then is discouraged, of course, or f5. We have d4, knight f1. Knight b6, as though this is an important square to get. But black already has committed an issue without knowing it. When he played just now, by the way, d4, again we see this big relationship between weak squares and tactics later on. You see that e4 square was just weakened there because black played this tempo on the knight. That e4 square is quite a major square for certain pieces, you know. It's a very important central square which you could, if you had a bishop there, you'd be eyeing the queen side and the king side. So black just gave that square up there for a moment. So anyway, knight b6, knight g5, and also the knight can even swing potentially. But here the immediate, maybe more immediate concerns, like this looks scary. Might not be, but maybe it looks scary. But black, for the moment, actually just ignored that and played knight d5. So the queen's being invited to dinner here, saying, come and go to h5. If what was, you might think, well, alternatives, h6, white could just, I don't know, there's a lot of options here. I'd expect this move to be playable, almost, because Fischer's played this kind of thing in his King's Indian games. Because what you do, you wrench open that h file, and as long as you don't get mated on this, you just get a rook to h1 and you just mate over there. And this, even if engines don't see it at a certain depth, it becomes dangerous later. It's starting to be at least equal now, but even that is dangerous. So anyway, so h6 wasn't played. Yeah, the queen was invited in. Pardon me, I'm talking about, no, the queen wasn't invited in. Got carried away there. Or was it? No, knight g5, the queen was invited in. Knight d5 was played, but the queen didn't go in. This is a plausible move. We see actually bishop d2, and now black took on g5. Bishop takes g5, queen d7. And here the queen goes in, queen h5. So seemingly pointless on h7. It needs help. The queen needs help if this soft spot attack is worth anything. You see that the knight's been driven away from defending h7. It is quite a substantial issue, given this great pawn wedge on e5. That soft spot is really a major issue in this position. We see rook fc8. So black is playing for some sort of queenside attack. Knight d2, knight c3, and now white really does put pressure on the dark squares. So it's a little bit analogous, I would say, to the Petrosian game in a way. It is a little bit analogous because this next move, remember in the previous game, Petrosian in a way managed to get his bishop to g7. What can we do with our dark square bishop here, which is quite devastating already? White's play, so you want to invade somehow the dark squares around the black king. Mind you, yes, g6 hasn't been played, but even so, there's a very strong dark square pressure move available now for white. Can you see what white played? If I give you 20 seconds. White's play. You know? Chat's still working, isn't it? Now, Adam78 on Play Chess, you've said bishop h6. Not quite, but that can actually be taken, it seems. I believe this might be playable to just take that. That's not quite right, but you're on the right track. Bishop f6, because we're getting a major form pawn if that's taken. If this is taken, this is a major form pawn, already threatening like to checkmate in 3 with this kind of thing. Queen mating there, and that would be too much, this position, because knight f3, then we got knight g5 threat, and if rook g8, then we got knight e5 hitting the queen with tempo on f7, and that form pawn's controlling g7, so this is end of game. So it's not wise to take this, basically. So black played queen e8, now knight e4, and now there's horrible threats emerging, like taking check and knight f6. Black played g6, queen g5 was played. If here queen h6, I think this allows queen f8, and black might be not as bad as the game. So queen g5, not allowing any tempo gain with queen f8. Now we have knight takes e4, rook takes e4, c4, h5, c takes. So black's getting a seemingly strong attack down the queen side. White's structure is being wrecked. But rook h4, what's Fischer's idea? Well, he's weaving a mating net here. These dark squares are just painfully weak. Rook a7, because already if d takes, let's see, hg is too strong. Fg, there'll be rook takes h7. Doesn't matter about the queening, whatever. In fact, we can examine that as part of this. The queen can just go back. And if it takes here, check, funny enough, check on c7 to mate on g7. So that gets too dangerous, basically. So black tried rook a7. Now we have bishop g2. So this bishop wasn't doing anything, right? It was of no significance there. And it's come onto this diagonal for some reason, you might think. And the reason is, after d takes c2, things are reaching seemingly dangerous proportions with maybe bishop d3 on the cards. But now white threatens mate in 1. And black plays queen f8. And guess what white has here? White to play this is a forced mate in 3 here. This is another wonderful checkmate. So first the dark squares have been weakened, and now major tactics like in the previous game. Now this is one of Fischer's most wonderful combinations, actually. Even though it's only, we could say mathematically, a mate in 3, it's actually quite a beautiful mate in 3. Okay, and it goes queen takes h7 check, king takes. Now h takes g brings the king out. Now if king g8, there's immediate mate with rook h8, and if the king does take on g6, you see weak e4 square is the punchline. Bishop e4 checkmate. This is what happens when you weaken some squares. This is what happens. You've got to be careful about creating weaknesses. Otherwise tactics will just, could wallop you later against a very strong opponent. So the real masters, they're going to weaken you on squares, and they're going to tactically murder you on them later as well. So you can't create too many weaknesses on dark squares, it seems. But it's actually a light square bishop. Checkmating here. The black squares are fully controlled with that bishop. It's kind of analogous, isn't it, to the previous game? I don't know if you see that sort of analogy. I hope you do. But yeah, I think both games together are kind of instructive tonight for how you can use quite a few general points, actually. How you can use seemingly tedious cooled spring openings to get big positional advantages in terms of creating a dominating grip on a certain colour complex, and then using that for a fantastic mating combination in both games. Okay, so I hope you enjoyed that one as well. Yeah, I think they're both instructive tonight. So have a good rest of the week, and see you next week. I hope you can like up the video if you enjoyed this session. Okay, I'm going now. Thanks very much. Have a good rest of the evening. Cheers then.